Hello, everybody. Welcome to our fourth meeting. Today, we'll be going over FK and IK setups and some of the setups that are in between those. So we'll start pretty easy. FK rundown. FK stands for forward kinematics. It refers to having to manipulate individual links of a chain to move a greater whole. In an arm, you'll move like the shoulder, the upper arm, the forearm, and then the hand if you wanted to pose the arm. And it's typically rotation based for that kind of a movement. Translation is definitely open, but you will kind of get a case where it's like translating an individual chain of a link of a chain like that. So you're kind of just stretching the joints or one joint around instead of manipulating the entire chain. The components of them are typically the joints, controls, which will most likely be NURBS, curves, buffer groups, and constraints. Buffer groups will be the groups that maintain the orientation of your controls so that they match the joints and they have a desired rotation. Because when you freeze transformations, you default your orientation of your object to the default world. So you will not, even if you set up your your orientations to your joint, they will not be maintained unless you have something above them or a parent that has that orientation data. So buffer groups are the groups that maintain a bunch of disgusting translation and rotation values so that you can have your controls be properly oriented to your joints. So how you make them? Essentially, I'm just going to skip the part where you make a joint chain. Essentially, you create a NURB circle and style it however you want. Parent it to the joint that it will be controlling. Zero out the attributes of its translations and rotations so that they are perfectly zeroed out. They will then be snapped to the joint. Zero out freeze transforms in case you scaled it or rotated it from there, because in this example, the joint, the controller will not be in a desired location to the actual joint chain. So I'll rotate it on the Z to be a circle that you can see out of the geometry, and then probably scale it up from there. Delete the history so that you can delete the make NURBS circle input node, which will be just or other dirty history that you get on creating controls. And depending on what the kinds of functions you want to be doing with this control, you'll group it to itself. So just click on the Control G or once or twice. Once, if you're not going to be applying any other constraints or inputs to this control, twice if you are going to be doing that. Say I want to have my head control follow different parts of the body, and I want to have a control that will determine if it'll follow the shoulders or if it'll follow the body or if it'll follow the root node. I will make two groups. One I'll just call the control group, and one's called the offset control group. Unparent the top group. The top group has all the dirty transformation data, but the second group has no data, and it is basically like another control. That is that would be the group that you put a bunch of constraints on. Then you unparent the groups and you constrain the controller to the joint. Rinse and repeat for every joint that you have in your chain. Next, we have the IK rundown. When Google slides the sites to speed up, there we go. Can you guys see the GIF that is it's kind of laggy on my screen, but can you guys see the GIF or the slide right now?
I can see the slide, but the GIF isn't running.
Yeah, the GIF is being very laggy. So basically, IK refers to... Yeah, it's going to be pretty funky, but IK refers to inverse kinematics. You use the final element or your end joint in a chain to control everything between the start and the end. So in an arm, you'll grab the wrist control, and you can therefore use it to pose the arm wherever you want. It's typically translation based, but you can access rotations to more or less just rotate the end joint. The rotation of the actual arm relies on the pull vector, which is being shown with this elbow control right now. Which will allow you to control the rotation of the entire chain and all the joints that fall within that chain. And the components of this are joints, controls, buffer groups, constraints, same as the FK, but the additions are handles, effectors, and pull vectors. Effectors is essentially the placement or the pivot of your end joint, and it determines where you will be affecting the. It determines where where your end joint will kind of be affected. I know that some people can tend to. I remember seeing one video that essentially tried to make a fake twist arm, and it put the effector for your IK handle at the middle of the forearm, so you can get that natural twist of your forearm where you have that kind of where you have the two bones crossing over each other. Effectors are typically something you don't touch very often. They're kind of just something that is created for when you create an IK handle. The only thing I really usually use effectors for is when I name them for organization. Handles, which are the actual IK controller that you can use to manipulate your entire arm. You don't want to use the raw handle to animate with. You want to create a controller that will parent constraint over that. And the pull vector essentially is the twist of the IK handle. This is something you could animate, but I don't recommend it because it's not very clean. There is a twist attribute in every IK handle that essentially controls where the pull vector of the IK handle goes, and it rotates your entire chain. So if you want to have your knee kind of twist outward, you can use the twist attribute to rotate it a certain number of degrees. You'll want to, and depending on what your animators prefer, you could see yourself creating a twist-based system for your pull vector where you don't have a PV control, like for example, the control that I have here. That would not be added. It would probably be put somewhere on like the hand control where you have a twist attribute that will control it there. Because I do know some people do prefer that. And how you make it, you essentially will go to your skeleton menu under the Create IK Handle tool. And from there, you have two common uses. You have a rotate plane and a single chain solver. Rotate plane solvers are typically used for chains that have more than one joint in them. So you can get a proper rotation, and you can therefore access rotation through a pull vector. Single chain is just a two-joint system typically. It's typically used for like a reverse foot setup where you want to have a IK handle for your heel, your ball, and the toe of your foot. So to create this IK handle, you'll want to command or control select the first and last deforming joint in your chain. So if you have like an end joint for your hand to determine the joint orientation of your hand or your wrist in this example, you'll want to select the actual wrist joint so you don't get that buffer joint caught up in this. And then repeat the control creation from FK for just your end joint, so the wrist joint in this case. And the next general setup is the IK spline joint chain. Can y'all see this slide?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. It's essentially a curve controlled IK handle. You won't be using an IK handle to really control this. It takes a bit more setup than usual than regular IK handles. It's controlled through a curve, and it's by default created by the handle and has a vertice on each joint. You can create your own curve and properly input it. So if you wanted to create a twist arm, you could just have one vertice at the shoulder joint and one vertice at the at the elbow joint, and that will create a proper twist between your start and end joint of your twist arm. So curve by default, automatically created. I usually use this for I usually use this for spine and neck areas where you'll want that elasticity, but it's always good to have an FK option between the two of them, just for depending on the preference of the animator. So the curve controls the curvature of your joint chain, and after some setup, it allows the posing of a spine through either a hip or a chest control. Yeah, so by default, you will need to select the CVs of the curve to be able to manipulate the spline IK handle, and we'll go into how to make that not the way it is by default, because it can take a little bit of setup. The components of this are joints, controls, buffer groups, constraints, effectors, handles as usual, but the additions are bind joints and curves, because as I will go through in the next slide, you will be using duplicate joints of your start and your end to bind it to the curve in order to have something that you can actively select to be able to pose the actual curve. So how you make it is you go to the skeleton and create IK spline handle tool command or tool. I'm using the default setting, so it will automatically create a curve. So you'll want to command or control select the first and last joint in your joint chain, and that will create your effector, your curve, and your IK handle. Afterwards, you'll duplicate your entire joint chain, so the first joint in your chain, and you will unparent your final joint in your joint chain, and then delete the parents of the first joint chain. So by this point, you will only have the start and your end joint of your joint chain left. I just nicknamed them start and end for this example. It just made things a bit easier. Then you'll want to skin those two joints to the curve you created, and if you move them around, you would end up getting some proper deformations in the spine. Next, what you want to do is click on your IK handle and go into the IK solver attributes of your attribute editor and enable the advanced twist controls. This will allow you, because by default, your IK spline handle really only works in terms of a translation. It doesn't rotate or it doesn't rotate or twist. So this will allow you to do that. It does take a lot of fine tuning depending on the joint orientations you have, because by default my joint orientations in this example are the default. So this will become a very easy process to do for this example, but you might not have default joint orientations in your rig. So when you enable the advanced twist controls, you'll probably get some very janky look to your joint chain. And you'll want to change your world up type. It's a drop-down menu to the object rotation up with the parentheses of start and end. And by doing this, you can input the names of two start and end joints or objects that the IK handle can use to properly orient your joints and enable twisting. So the reason why I nicknamed these start and end is because they were unique names in this situation. If I use joint 1 and joint 6 in this, it would get confused between the base joint chain and the bind joint, but in this case. So you'll want to input your joint names of the duplicates that you skin to your curve into the two text fields that you'll get for your object rotation ups, or your world up object text fields. I can run through a demo real quick so I can give you guys a bit more of a visual example, because it is a bit hard to explain clearly. And when you have that done, you will be able to twist, and rotate, and translate your IK spline handle. The final example that I really have is a hybrid approach. It's a mixing of any of the above examples and allows for a variety of control options, allows for pretty flexible rigs, and it is pretty much the setup that I typically use for a head or spine if you wanted to have a one end-all be-all control solution, because you can essentially create an IK spline control, an IK spline rig, and with an FK control in the middle to allow you to have a bit more control. So the components of this can be any IK setups, more buffer groups, a shorter FK joint chain, and then FK controls. You can make these by creating a new joint chain and pinning the start and end joints to where your start and end joints of your old joint chain are. So in this case, I have an IK spline rig, and I would pin the start joint to the hip control that I have right here, and the top control that I have right here. You guys can see this, right? You can see the PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah,
we can see the PowerPoint.
Okay,
yeah.
cool. Just want to make sure I'm not lagging. So you'll create those two. You'll need to keep those two joint positions in mind. And in this case, I have a stomach control. That would probably be another place where you'd put a joint. So you'll have those three joint locations guaranteed. However, if I wanted to add an FK joint, I would input in between joints in between these controls. So I'd put like a joint right here and a joint right here because I can then take advantage of those locations. Or right on the stomach as well, because having a direct middle would probably be beneficial. So you'll make those 5, in this case it would be a 5 joint chain. You'll parent constrain 3 of them. In this case, it would be the joint right here, the joint right here, and the joint right here to the buffer groups of each of their controls. So I would parent it to the middle group right here so that they can not have messy values getting constrained. So you'll parent constrain the start and end joints to the start and end control groups. And then afterwards, you'll have a bunch of empty joints that don't have constraints on them. So in this case, there would be a joint here and here. And if you rotate them, they will rotate the setup that we have here like a normal FK setup. Afterwards, you'll want to create a regular FK setup for the in-between joints. So basically just control, buffer groups, constraints, and that's basically all you have. That is it for the creation of actual setups in of themselves. But there are times where you'll have an IK and an FK setup for arms, legs, spines, and necks, for example. So you'll need to blend them together. And there are 2 common methods for that. In basic rigging, I do believe that they teach you about constraints. I have also been told that blend color nodes are also far superior. I've used both of them. I prefer to use constraints because it's quicker to set up. So blend color nodes allow for a cleaner outliner, but ends up with more nodes in total because blend color nodes only allow you to input the translate or the rotate. So you'll need to create 2 blend color nodes for each joint. Constraints are less nodes in total because you'll be using parent constraints most likely, but your outliner will be far messier. So as far as the blend color nodes perspective, they only are objects you'll see if you turn off DAG objects in your outliner. They're objects that don't really appear. They're basically native node editor nodes. They allow you to mix 2 attributes together or switch between them using one blender attribute, so it is very easy to set up in terms of a actual switch between the 2 of them. The only caveat to this is that you need to make sure that your joints, when you're blending between IK and FK, have the matching values. If you're in a T-pose and your IK joint for your shoulder has a different default translation value than your FK joint, your result joint or your bind joint will get offset by this, and it will look very weird, and it will basically break. There is a way to fix this. You can use unit conversion nodes. There is a website that I found a good example of using unit conversion nodes, and I can send that later. But if you're running into this issue, it is honestly a very easy thing to fix. You just need to take your bind joints and duplicate them again, because your bind joint values are by default are what you want for your entire joint chain. You need to make sure that your IK and FK joint chains are essentially having the same default values as your bind joints. And the final one is using constraints, which we went over last week. The only real note about these is that you'll probably want to maintain offset off here, because we do want joints to essentially pin to the location of other joints. And a general workflow for all of these, you need to make sure that you have either constraints or blend colors nodes for every joint in your joint chain. even the hypothetical end joint that doesn't get any skinning added to it or doesn't have any controllers on it and is just there for joint orientations, you do want to put a blender on either of the two of them on that joint, because therefore you can just keep a good consistent, you can make sure that you don't have any weird orientations popping up every now and then, because your IK joint might be rotated where the FK isn't, and therefore it'll cause a weird discrepancy in your skinning. That is it for the presentation. Does anybody have any questions, or would anybody like a specific demo on any of the three setups that we went over to get further in-depth answers to those? You guys can see Maya? Okay. Yeah. So this joint is just going to be the end joint. I'm just going to keep that in mind for now. This joint will not be getting skinned. It's just there for joint orientations. Another thing that helps me is going to transform display local rotation axes. It helps me keep a good reference point as to what the LRA for these are. Because if I turn them on from here, you can see that they're not the values that you want. They're not the values. They're not identical to these. And the easy way to fix that is is to click on your joint, go into the attribute editor, and find the joint orient, and just zero out all these values, and you'll see that they're just fine. I'm going to go to the skeleton, create IK spline handle, pull up the tools. Okay, so when I do this, I will now create a curve. I want to have deformations from this joint to this joint, and now at joint 5 is the end joint. For a spine setup, what I typically do, because you will encounter some wonkiness if you just keep it as is, where this end joint that is not having any skinning data placed on it, it will mess up your spine, and I do believe that in this joint does kind of invert. It'll just cause a lot of problems that you don't want to cause. So I'll go back to the skeleton, create IK handle tool, and change it from rotate plane solver to single chain solver, since we're only going to be doing this for two joints, and create an IK handle for these two. This IK handle is not going to be moved. It is only going to be grouped and then parent constrained to the control that we create for this, so that you don't have any flipping when you do connect a neck to this, or any skinning issues, yada yada yada. I believe that's it for the tool settings. From there, we'll duplicate our entire joint chain and grab the joint that has the end joint for our IK spline handle. In this case, it's joint 5. We'll just Shift P to unparent it, and delete all of its children, and then delete all the children of the duplicate joint chain right here. I'll just name these start and end for this example. And then once I have these two, I'm going to command select these two, and then the curve, press and hold spacebar to open up the hotbox, skin, bind skin, and now if I grab these two joints, you can see that I'm now basically controlling the entire spine handle. Afterwards, I'm just going to name this spline NSC. So I'll grab the spline solver, and in my attribute editor, under the name where I can find the translate values, I'll go to IK solver attributes, and then go to advanced twist controls. If I click on this, you see that the joint orientations just bug out completely. The defaults are never good. So click on this world up type, drop down, and go to object rotation up, start and end. And you will find yourself shifting these values around a lot if your joint orientations are different. I find that, because these are default, the defaults here work. Because these are default joint orientations. So I'll just input the start joint into the first world up object, and I will input end into the second, and now all these joint orientations are fixed. And if I rotate them on the y-axis, you can see that they are twisting properly. So from there, we would create controls for these. I'm going to just group these together into a bind joint group. And I'll just create two controls. We'll just call this hip control and shoulder control. So first we will parent the shoulder control at the end and the hip control to the start, and select both of these controls, go to the channel box, and grab all the translate and rotate values and hit 0. They will, since they have sharing attributes, both of these actions will be mirrored. I do believe that if I rotate Z, rotate to get them in place for however you want. Go to the poly modeling and click on this middle button to delete all of its history. The only one that had history was the hip control because that was the default. That was the first one. Freeze transforms to negate all of its rotations and translations. And now the axes are properly in line with our joints. They are properly in line with our joints. And I will group these twice to each other. I'll just call this offset hip offset group and hip control group. I have just gotten into the mindset of always double grouping because I have found myself very often adding constraints to a lot of controls. So I just make double group it to be safe from now on. So I'll grab these two groups and unparent them. And you see now that these two groups have a lot of dirty data in them that we are gladly avoiding with our controls. So I'll grab my shoulder control and parent constrain it to the end joint right here. And go to my hip control and parent constrain it to the start joint. And by clicking G, I can repeat a command that I just did. So now that we have that, we can grab these controls and manipulate the entire spine handle. From there, I would create an FK hybrid joint. I'm just going to go through the FK hybrid because it is also pretty commonly used in spines, at least from what I've used. Just to get that principle out of the way. So going back to the joint, I'll hit V, press and hold V to enable vertex snapping, and I can snap it to this joint. Afterwards, I know that this is pretty much the direct middle of the chain, so I can vertex snap it or just hold shift and have this move in a vertical direction. I can force it to move in. Once I click here, it's snapped to the vertical translation, so I'm just going to move it right here. And then I'll type V again and snap it to this joint. I'll just go to search and replace names. With hierarchy selected, I'll search for joint and change it to FK. This is essentially the hip, this is the shoulder, and I will, with these two selected, with the hip joint selected, I will control or command select the control group for the hip control, go to constrain, parent, and then with maintain offset turned on, I'll add a parent constraint. Same for the shoulder. And now if I just take the raw joint and rotate it in perspective view, you can see that you are now completely manipulating the entire joint chain with an FK hierarchy. And because of the offset group, we can still manipulate it from there. The only problem with this setup is that the FK control doesn't follow the IK setup. So if you move it over here, your FK control will still stay here. However, I'm pretty sure that if you add like a follicle to it, you can get yourself. If you add like a follicle or a point on poly constraint, like we covered last week, you can get, or a few weeks ago, you can get your FK control to follow this middle joint right here because that is where we placed our FK control. Afterwards, now that we have this set up, we'll just go through the process of making a quick FK control. Just parent it, zero out its controls, rotate it on the Z, freeze and delete history, double group it, unparent it, grab the control, and parent constraint. And from there, we now have a FK control and an IK setup. Oh, get out of here. And that's pretty much it for the demo. Does anybody have any questions on this or any other topic that we covered today?
That was a really good demo.
Yeah, it was really good. I'm not a rigger, so most of this stuff kind of went over my head, but I understand the basics now.
Okay,
so that's
cool.
good.
That's good to hear. Is there any things that like specifically went over your head that you would want to get clarification on? Because I know that I can have weird speech sometimes.
Mostly like it's like rigging jargon that I'm just not really familiar with.
Oh,
I suppose.
That's fair.
I know that you have like your joint hierarchy, and then you have your IK and FK hierarchies. Like they each have their own different ones. Is that correct?
Yeah. When you have in this case, this would have been my bind joints. Since this would be in the exclusive situation where I don't have like a secondary setup that I want to add to it. This would just be the one setup that the animators would have. This would be my bind joints. These would be my bind joints just to save space and not have a bunch of kind of superfluous nodes in a way.
Okay.
Yeah, so if this was one setup, and this was just the IK spline or the IK group, I'll just group these together and just say, let's just say this was the IK group. I would first. Oh, I messed that up. Okay. Yeah, this is the IK group. I would duplicate the base joint chain for the first part. I would duplicate the base joint chain, and this would be like an FK setup. And then I duplicate it again, and this would be the bind setup that is getting skinning data to it. So like.
So, is there a difference between like your base joint setup and then like the one that is white painted?
What do you mean by base joint setup and the one that's getting skin painting?
Oh boy.
It's all good.
This is where my lack of rigging experience shows. So in Maya, I've only ever like used the auto rigger, and I've like used there's this plugin. It's like advanced skeleton or something.
Right, yeah.
So I've used that a couple of times, and so like I create the joints, or it just gives me like a pre-built rig that I can use. And once I hit like skin or like auto skin or auto build rig or something, it creates like it breaks my joints into two. So like say if I have like two like a joint that goes from like the shoulder to the elbow and then to the elbow to the wrist, and like that's like two bones, right? And then go to hit like build skeleton or something, it's gonna like break it up. Like it's gonna make the one joint from the shoulder to the elbow like three joints instead of one.
Oh, right.
And then the same thing for the wrist.
Yeah, that is a case where advanced skeleton has one base joint chain that is just an entire biped body. That is the joint chain that is being bound to your skin or your mesh. Afterwards, it creates a bunch of like IK and FK joints and just a bunch of joints in general to do all your controls for, essentially. So yeah, the difference is that you typically you'll want to like have a separate joint chain that you will be binding your skin to, that you have your entire control setup controlling the bind joints. So you do not want to have a bind joint that is controllable. Essentially, you want the bind joints to be controlled by a setup that is being controlled by controls. Essentially, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. With that, are there any other questions?
Can you go over the IK and FK switch?
Totally.
The blend node, because the method that I know is using constraint, but it's pretty heavy for the rig.
That's fair. Yeah, I'll go over the blend colors nodes real quick. So for this, we don't really need an IK setup. We just need a bunch of joints. I will just delete these to make it a bit simpler. So we have 3 joints. They're identically the same. Same translation, rotation, and scale values. So you'll want to make sure that these values are shared between the 3 of them, the 3 copies. So I'll just call this one bind, FK, and IK. If you find yourself that if you find for some odd reason, because I have had it happen in the past, where this FK joint for some reason its X value is 10, but it's currently at the same position as all of these 3 joints, just feel free, just delete it and reduplicate the bind joint. You should be fine. And most likely you didn't have any issues with, and most likely you won't have to redo a setup because you will probably have already made your controls by that point. You can just reparent constrain it to the joint. So once we've done that, we'll have our joint chains in this case, and we'll go to Windows Node Editor and display all these joints. So for the first, oh, that's right, I can't translate because I'm using a trackpad. So hit Tab and go to Blend Colors. We'll type in Blend Colors, and you'll have sets and colors. So just click on Blend Colors at the bottom, and it creates this one node that has a color 1 RGB and color 2 RGB.
Brandon, I cannot see your node editor.
Oh, you can't? Oh, right. That's because I'm sharing only that screen. Oh, man. I'm going to stop streaming, and I'll start streaming the node editor. Okay. Can y'all see the node editor?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just realized the error with that. I'm just going to share let's just see if sharing my screen in general will work. Because there are times where I'm going to be needing to switch from attribute editor to the node editor for this example. So you can see my screen now? Is it laggy? Like, is it super laggy right now?
Oh, it's having the same problem as before. That's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is.
Okay. We'll just, we'll make do with the just node editor, and I'll go to the attribute editor when it is needed. I think I can illustrate it just with a node editor. Okay.
Well, can you also just put the node editor, just put it in, your main, Maya window?
Oh, my dog's barking. Sorry about that. I'm just going to let her out real quick. But yeah. That's a really good point. I completely forgot that you can dock windows in Maya. So thank you, Roman. Okay. Let's just share Maya in general. Okay, so you can see everything, right? Everything is not laggy.
Yeah, there we go.
Perfect.
Cool.
So hit the tab. You'll have a search bar that you can create a node. Type in Blend Colors and click on this one. I have never used Blend Colors set, so I could not tell you what it can do. And in your channel box, you have color 1 RGB and then color 2 RGB. In this case, they will represent the 3 axes of movement, so X, Y, and Z. And you have a blender, which is by default set to mix the 2 of them at 0.5. The blender is basically is far easier to use than the constraint, because when you have a constraint, you'll have 2 blenders essentially, and you'll have to create a node to blend between the 2 of them, and it does take a little bit of issue. This is just a straight 0 to 1 value that you can directly connect your blender, your IKFK blend attribute to this blender, and is very convenient. So for that, to get this set up, I'll just type this in as translate, and then I'll duplicate it and rename it to rotate. Because when you input, so we'll have, because of the color 1R and 2R, we have 2 attributes that we can blend through each other. I'm going to click on this little circle right here, and it will give me the ability to grab the joint's translate values. If it doesn't, go on to other, and it'll pull up this entire thing, which you can just find the translate anyways. So with that, we have our little pick whip here, and we can go to the circle here, and put it into the color 1. So yeah, because we grabbed the entire all translates here, it will go into all color 1s here. And we'll do the same for the IK. And put it in, it'll default to color 2. The thing that you need to make sure that you're consistent about is that every IK joint will go into color 2 from this point, and FK will go into color 1. The order of which you start them in does not matter, just keep it consistent throughout the rig, including the rotations. So we'll then click on this circle again and go to rotate, change it to color 1, and this will have a unit conversion because of this just goes through a unit conversion because rotates can be zeroed out on joints, whereas joints translations are going to be unremovable. They do not have any conversion process when you freeze them. Essentially, they stay at their default value of the world position. So we'll go to the rotate here, and it defaults to the color 2. Then we will click on this circle here, go to the output, and grab the entire output. Click on the bind joints circle and input it into its translate, and then repeat output into the rotate. So with that said, our blenders are currently at 0.5. So if I grab the FK joint and just translate it, it will be perfectly in between the two of them. We can manually select both of these and type the blender attribute to 1. And now it is currently where the IK is currently in FK mode right now. So if I grab the IK, you won't see anything. The bind joint won't be there, but if I set it to 0.75, you can see that it is going towards the FK. With that said, we need to create a blender to blend between the two of them easily, well, far easier than just grabbing these two right here. So this can be really anything. I'm just going to create a NURB circle here, and this will be going through the creation of attributes that and direct connections that Dara went through in the last meeting. So I'll go to Channels, Edit, Add Attribute. This will be a float attribute, so it's going to be, it doesn't have to be a strict 0 to 0 or 1 like an integer, but it can be from 0, 0.1, 0.2, yada, yada, yada. And I'll just call this FK_IK blend. Minimum will be 0, maximum will be 1, and its default will be 0. It will be keyable. You can override its long name into a nice name, and I will just title default 0 and change this to FK/IK blend. Okay. I will select these two blend colors nodes. I'm going to open up the connection editor, and I'm going to snap it in here somewhere. I'm going to remove the node editor for now and just snap it in here somewhere, hopefully. Never mind. That is not going to work. Oh, well, we can just use the node editor. So I'll snap it back in here. This NURB circle is already in here because it was created when we had the node editor opened already. So I'll go down and I will click on this box, on this circle, grab the FK/IK blend, go into the blend colors and click on the blender right here and right here. So when this is at 0, these two's blenders are at 0. So this is now in IK mode, if I recall correctly. Yep, it's in IK mode. So now we can essentially blend between the two of them. I will just key this real quick to make it easier to see. And yeah, we now have a IK/FK blender essentially with blend colors nodes. Did that answer your question good enough, Keen?
Yeah. I think I missed the point when you said like if you have like a joint chain, like you have 3 or 4 joints.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, I can do it with more joints. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Totally. Just will.
Yo, Brandon, my friend is like threatening to leave without me to go get food. I appreciated the presentation.
Totally.
I'll, yeah, I'll talk with you in the future about inter-club stuff at some point.
Awesome. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah, have a good lunch, dude. The
thanks,
rest
man.
of this recording will probably be posted within the next few days, so I'll be sure to let you know about that.
Super
Yep.
cool. Alright, awesome, man. Thank
See
you.
ya.
Have a good day, everyone.
Have a good day, dude. Okay. Yeah, we'll just say this is our joint chain for now. This is yeah, we'll just say this is our joint chain for now. I'll just type in a pseudonym or a suffix for these. Okay. And duplicate it twice. Okay, so with that done, we will just grab all of these joints and go into the node editor. Actually, let's just grab every joint in general. Who cares about organization? So for that, now we have our all of our joints in here, and we're going to basically be just creating two blend colors nodes for each joint, so we will end up with 8 in total. I'll just title this one joint 1 translate, joint 2, or joint 1 rotate, if it'll let me type. So from there, we'll grab translate color 1, translate color 2, rotate color 1, snapping, rotate will go to color 2, output to translate, and then output to rotate. And replace all these. Oh, wrong joints.
Hey guys, I'm gonna have to run, but Brandon, appreciate the demo.
Absolutely. Yeah, sounds good. Thanks for coming, Kenny.
Yep,
Alright,
thanks for
sure.
coming.
Yeah, we'll see you guys around.
See you around. Okie dokie. If anybody wants to ask any questions while I'm setting this up, feel free to. But yeah, it's basically just going to be a case where I am inputting. It's kind of like a rinse and repeat process. I'm just inputting these translates and rotates into a bunch of duplicated blend color nodes. Because I'm working on a trackpad, I can't use the I can't translate through the node editor, which sucks. So I'll always have a mouse on hand, so you have a middle mouse. Let's see. Okay, that's working, and that's working. Oh yikes! My dogs are barking again. Sorry about that.
I have a dog just like that.
Do you have
He barked at his. Or what? You go.
do you have Shih Tzus too?
No, but I have a. It's a weird mix. It's a Chihuahua / Wiener dog / Dachshund mix.
Huh.
So he's a really long Chihuahua Dachshund.
That is. that is a mix. I've never heard of that. It's pretty cool.
It's like my mom calls him a Cheweenie.
Well, that's a name.
Yeah, he barks at his own reflection sometimes. It's highly annoying.
My dog is scared of cameras, so she doesn't look at mirrors well.
What? Wait, how's your dog know what a camera is though?
No clue. She's just really shy to photos. It was really weird. Okay, with that should be finishing up here soon. And there we go. So with that said, I'm just gonna. Oh, I should have kept that FK blender around. We'll just go to add attribute FK _ IK blend 0 1. Won't give it a nice name.
Oh, so we can't see the add attribute window.
Crap.
Anything that's not docked is
That's
invisible.
right. Okay, going to grab all of these and this, and if I click on these little stars, it'll clear it like there was nothing to begin with. Grab this NURB circle, go to FK blend, swap it, attach it to the blender, click on this blender, and there we go. In like a minute, we'll have our proper FKIK setup, more or less. And there we go. So if I did this, I do believe that the FK joint now has control. Yep. So we're in FK mode right now, and I will just hide these two joint chains so you can only see the result joint chain, and I'm just going to grab these three, and you can now see that the FK joint chain is controlling the result or the bind joint chain. Swap it on over to the IK, and if I grab the IK, everything's going to be rotating with the IK. So because we had basically just take your, if you wanted to get an estimate on how many blend color nodes you'll have, just double the amount of joints that you have in your joint chain, and that's pretty much what you'll end up with. Is there anything does that answer your question, Keen?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Awesome.
Are there any other questions that anybody has?
Oh, actually, I have another question about this one. So usually, do we have any kind of like underground rule for the FK and IK switch? I mean, like usually FK is 0 and IK is 1, or vice versa.
Yeah, I usually try to keep FK at 0 and IK at 1, and then but if you want to make sure that if you want to keep that naming convention, if you want to make that naming convention inversed in any way, just make sure that your attribute reflects that. So because I typed FK to IK blend, it's implying that like 0 is the FK, so 0 is so I'm blending it in this attribute from FK to IK because I listed them from FK and IK. I don't really know if there's like an underground like rule that you typically want to always have in terms of your attributes. I usually just try and keep it consistent in your rigs. So yeah, if you have one blender for FK and IK, just make sure that 0 for all FK and IK blenders on your rig are, when they're set to 0, will be in FK mode, and when they're set to 1, will be in IK mode, just to keep it consistent.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions that anybody has? All right.
I think that might be it.
If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to us in the questions channel of the Discord, or just in general, or DM, or feel free to DM us. Yeah, thanks for a great meeting, everybody. We'll be back here next week. If you have any questions, let us know. If you haven't filled out the sign-in sheet, feel free to do that. Yeah, feel free to head out if you want to. Feel free to stick around if you want to. Yeah.
Solid meeting. All right. Meeting is over.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Yep. Thank you all for sticking around.